Welcome to the welcome to the second day of the Science Board's meeting here in the Wright Hotel. We've got a few things to get done today, so let's start with a Delta Stewardship Council update with Cassandra Enos.
Good morning, and thank you. So I'm here today to give you an update on the Conveyance, Storage, and Operations Amendment and the upcoming ISB review. So I wanted to take a few minutes just to give you a little bit of background on the amendment itself and the status of it. So under Water Code Section 85304, it states that the Delta Plan should promote options for new and improved infrastructure relating to the water conveyance in the Delta storage systems and for the operation of both to achieve the co-equal goals. So in 2013, when the plan was first written, BDCP was to be incorporated into the plan. So what the Delta Plan did at the time was to promote the BDCP process. So in the plan we stated that the BDCP permitting for it should be completed by 2016. If that did not occur, that we would revisit conveyance, storage, and operations. So in 2015, as you know, the administration made a decision to pursue California Water Fix and EcoRestore in lieu of BDCP. So at that time, the council started revisiting the promotion of conveyance options as we committed to in the Delta Plan. And since that time, they've had several actions since June of 2015, including a solicitation process to get a consultant on board to provide technical expertise. The council adopted 19 principles for water conveyance, storage, and operations of both, and staff had held numerous discussions with the council and various panels on the proposed amendment and continued to seek out best available science. Also, the council presented and discussed the actual draft amendment at 3 meetings of this year, February, March, and April, and heard public comments. In addition, we had public workshops, and we've had an NOP workshop as well. So that kind of brings you to where we are today. I'm sorry, notice of preparation for the CEQA. Thank you. So any questions so far on that? On the rationale behind developing the amendment or the process? So where we are today, so right now we anticipate developing a new version of the amendment to present at the May Council meeting, which will incorporate comments that we heard from the Council last month and from the public, with the intent to go back and continue to hear comments in this month and then revise the amendment and go back to them in June and ask for their endorsement to start the development of the EIR for the amendment. And that EIR will actually cover 3 amendments to the Delta Plan. It'll be conveyance, storage, and operations, the performance measures, and the levy. So at the time after we get approval from the council, assuming that occurs in June, we would bring an amendment to the ISB for your review. And right now, the amendment includes 4 sections. We have an introduction, a problem statement that's been refined from the original problem statement, recommendations, as well as performance measures. And by the time you see the amendment, the performance measures will have all gone through the external expert review. So as I said, we anticipate coming back to you in June with a revised and approved or endorsed version for your review, and we're requesting if you could review the document by August, and we'd be asking questions such as, is the body of science that was used to develop the amendment relevant and complete? Is there any important scientific literature missing, and do the scientific findings support the introduction and problem statements? And we anticipate continuing to work with you over the next month or so to actually finalize the charts that would be developed. So that is all I have. If anyone has any questions, yes, please.
So the documents we'll get, will they be like a scientific review with all the proper scientific notations and all of the?
Yes, right now we have like over 80 citations included.
Sorry, Cassandra, you said there were 3 amendments. I lost track of them. One of them having to do with conveyance and storage and another with levies.
Yeah, it's a
Could you flesh out a little bit?
Sure, I'm sorry. It's a Delta Levy Investment Strategy Amendment, so they've been working on that. I'm not familiar with when it started. It was before my time, but that was approved by the council, and I think it was April. And then the other one's the performance measures. They've been continuing to refine the performance measures, and they are currently in the process of getting council endorsement on that. They anticipate this will also be approved in June. The conveyance, storage, and operations. So that's the amendment that I was discussing related to promoting options for conveyance, storage, and operations. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so would you be asking for feedback from the ISB on all 3 of those amendments, the conveyance, storage, and operation, the performance measures, and the Delta Levy investment strategy, or just on the conveyance, storage, and operations?
Just on the conveyance, storage, and operations, I believe that the Delta Levy investment strategy already had feedback from the ISB, and that the performance measures that went out to expert review at the recommendation of the ISB.
Right, yeah, I just wanted to see whether we would be seeing that again, or, okay. Thank you.
And I should clarify that the current conveyance, storage, and operations amendment is one amendment to, or one section of the plan, that all the existing Delta plan policies and regulations would be complementary to that. It's not intended to replace policies and recommendations related to things like Delta as a place, or water, reduced reliance, etc.
The plan amendment on conveyance, storage, and operations is potentially pretty important. It might be hard for us to do that in 2 months.
Okay.
That would be, maybe with the new chair, it'll be faster.
Well, the new chair is just going to delegate everything to the past chair, but the question, so tell us again about the timetable. We would expect to get that in June, right after the June council meeting?
Correct.
And you'd want it by?
End of August, perhaps?
And how long of a document is this?
Right now, it's about 30 pages. The body of the document is 30 pages, and I think the total, including attachments, such as there's a table of the history of development of different conveyance, storage, and operations options, and there's citations and a map. It's about 50 pages total. So we're intending or hoping to start the CEQA and release the EIR in beginning of September. So I think having feedback, and even if we don't have the final report, but some initial feedback in August would be helpful prior to releasing the draft EIR.
Is there a draft now that's available to look at? Or
There is a
working
draft. Yeah, there is. Yeah. And we'll be presenting one on the 25th, the next version to the council.
On the 25th of May?
Yes.
That's the one we'll see.
Then we were intending to present the draft that's approved by the council in June, because there may be some further edits to the May version, so.
Any additional questions? Brian?
What are seen to be the major scientific issues that the board would be asked to comment on?
I would say probably the major issue is the science around the existing through Delta conveyance, and being able to meet the co-equal goals under the existing systems. So impacts to the ecosystem from the current operations, such as, the issues related to reverse flows and entrainment.
Okay, any additional comments, questions? All right, thank you very much then. Oh, Dick.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, I guess I'm, remaining a little bit frustrated. We make declarations on, or we review the science, but do we review every decision being made? And I feel like if we're reviewing the adequacy of the science, then we're on record for the adequacy of the science. But in a sense, we've been doing that all along. And so to also review particular policy decisions, it's not clear that that's what we should be doing.
I think that the intent would be there's about 16 pages of problem statement discussion that sets the stage for the actual policy not policy, but the recommendations. So I think we would want to focus the review on all of the scientific literature that was used to support the problem statement that sets the stage for the recommendations, as opposed to whether the policy recommendations are appropriate or you agree with those.
And you're asking us to do this after the council has made its decision.
After the council has endorsed the language that's stable enough to start the EIR process. So that doesn't mean it's the final language. It means that's the initial project description that will be used in the analysis for the environmental impact report. Then there will be additional public input and review and evaluation. It could be that the language is revised before the council would adopt the amendment, which would be later in the year after the secret process is complete.
Okay.
All right, well, any additional questions, comments? Brian?
I'm still puzzled, that's all. So the problem statement will concern the existing situation with reverse flows and all that. And so the board would be asked to comment on the adequacy of that description of the way things are. And the board would not be asked to comment on the proposed solutions to that problem. Is that right?
Well, certainly the board is welcome to comment on anything that you feel you'd like to. I would maybe defer to Cliff. He has a good sense of what's in the problem statement and the science supporting that as to what he would suggest would be the best request for review.
The body of the science is in the problem statement. That would be, I think, where you'd want to focus your attention.
All right. Thank you very much then.
All right, thank you for your time. I appreciate it and look forward to working with you guys and developing the charge over the next month or so.
Okay. Thank you. We have a public comment, Barbara Dowling.
Before we go on with
Go
that,
ahead.
shouldn't we set up maybe a small team that would take the lead at that, because they can start looking at least the draft of it in May to start thinking about?
I think that would be a good idea. Let's have the incoming chair, the next to incoming chair, and Tracy is hiding, and I confer with the Stewardship Council folks on how this is coming over the horizon. Does that work?
So the four of us. No, the three of us.
This is the three of us.
Okay, yeah.
And then we'll assign it to Tracy.
And then we'll assign it to Tracy. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thanks. So, Martina, do you have that noted down? Thank you. Barbara Daly? Daly? Thank you.
Push the button and it turns red. It's not red yet.
There, okay. All right, thank you. Good morning, my name is Barbara Daly. I live in the Delta, I live in Clarksburg, and I am a member of a group called North Delta Cares that has been working on the water issues in the Delta for a long time. I've been working on them since 2009 myself, and I've gone to a lot of meetings like this. I've kind of raised myself in this part of my life on the water. It's not what I thought I'd be doing. But I did attend the last two Delta Stewardship Council meetings, and I intend to attend the next one in the end of May. And I just wanted to tell you that that as the amendment is written, it does not protect the legacy towns. And in fact, if it hasn't changed very much, we will be locked into the tunnels if it is accepted as written, and no other alternatives will be able to be accepted. And that is per the advice of a member of the Central Valley Flood Protection Committee who advised me of that. So I'm just sharing that information with you, that there is a something to look for in there that could happen. And also with the Delta Levy Investment Strategy, I've been attending those meetings as well, and also the Delta Levy Assessment District meetings. And there are many levies that they talk about, but their decision is, as far as the 9 legacy town goes, in this part of the Delta, it's not being protected. It's not high priority in their Delta Levy Investment Strategy or their assessment district. And the other thing that I think is very notable is that the assessment district does not include the water contractors as helping to pay for the maintenance of our levees. So there's a lot of problems with in my opinion, as a citizen out here, as part of the public, of how these documents are being written and how they do not protect and actually follow the water code, the last part of the water code, 85054, to, I think I said that right, to protect and enhance the Delta as place, the recreation, the agriculture, the cultural values, and the natural resources. Do you have any questions for me? Yes.
Thank you very much. Can you define the legacy community for me? And is everything in the inner Delta included, or is there something more that's a criterion?
Well, they are outlined in the Delta Reform Act, I believe, and the Delta Plan. Excuse me. And they've outlined the Delta as a primary zone and a secondary zone. And in the primary zone, which reaches pretty much up from Freeport to Rio Vista, there are 9 legacy towns. I think there are a couple other that are outlying that area. Collinsville would be one. Knightson is another one. But in the primary zone itself, if we go from north to south, it's Freeport, Clarksburg, Hood, Cortland, Locke, Walnut Grove, Ryde, and Ileton, and Rio Vista.
Thank you. And how many people are involved in that? Do you have an estimate?
It is a region. So the towns themselves are very small, but each town has a school, almost everyone, at least a grade school. Some have a middle school, and there are 2 high schools. There are churches in every town. They're well attended, and they bring in the people from the whole region. So there are many people that live in the country. The towns themselves are mostly small. Probably the largest is Rio Vista. Ileton was one of the first incorporated cities in California, and it needs some sprucing up, I have to admit, but I believe that if we can help the economic activity out here, and there are many things we could do to do that, I believe that that little town will just thrive because people are very interested in seeing it for its historical value.
What proportion of the people in that inner delta live in the towns versus isolated dwelling units?
I don't know exactly.
I'm trying to get at what is the legacy town population?
Right. Clarksburg is a thriving town, and then maybe that has about 2,000. Mark Pruner is the head of our fire district, and he's here. Mark, could you help me with this? Are you there?
You're just going to fill out a speaker card.
Oh, okay.
Can I speak without filling out a?
You can give us that number that she's looking for.
She would like to know how many people live in our legacy towns as compared to the.
Just roughly.
Just roughly.
We're talking about 10,000 people, 20,000.
There you go. Thank you. I learned from yesterday. In the township of Clarksburg, for example, approximately 254 people live within the urban limit line. It's not a city limit line, but it approximates, it's an idea that it's our urban limit line. But the community, de facto community, is really about just shy of 1,800 people within the district. And the reason for that is not like a spot of urbana that just dropped into a piece of dirt. The truth is that the community, the fire district, serves the entire community. Is made up of people. We have meetings throughout, and there's constant interaction between folks, as you said, isolated. They really aren't isolated in terms of social connection or agricultural connection or business connection or any other connection. They just happen to live a little bit more distance away. But it's an integrated community within the district. So I think it's more accurate, more factual, more data-driven to refer to the community as the district. So each hood, Cortland, et cetera, they all have communities that surround them, and that's the community, not just the compacted group of houses.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I had one comment. I'm from Bethel Municipal.
Yeah, can you come up and that way we have your words immortalized?
I'm not a good public speaker, though.
No, nobody's all that good.
Right by where the gooseneck starts.
Oh, okay. My name's Bob Amron. I'm from Bethel Island. I'm a director on the Bethel Island Municipal Improvement District, and we are too a legacy community and have been for a number of years. We have a population of 2,282, and we are actually a real island there. I was just going to add that bit. We don't have a school. We do have 2 churches. No fire department. We're served by East Contra Costa County Fire District. So that was. I just want to put in that little 2 cents for Bethel Island.
Thank you very much. Bethel Island, I think it's one of the most urbanized areas that's below sea level in the Delta. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. And you're looking for a new manager, I see.
Right.
So if anybody's interested, I know they have some interesting problems down there. Mark, were you filling out a blue card? Oh, good. Well, okay. All right. Let's move on to the next agenda item then. Status of comprehensive assessment. Oh, no. I'm review of the memo for EcoRestore Adaptive Management Program, white paper. John Weeds, I think you, no? You working on that? Joy. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, we're talking about that.
Oh, yeah, we're talking about that.
Thank you. One moment. This was a really delightful task. Thank you for asking me to work on this. It began with a charge to provide a few comments back to the authors And I started by writing a number of editorial comments, but then John took a look at it and developed a more structured approach with a few bullet items at the beginning to pull out the more important issues. Artistic, linguistic. And Tracy was quickly on board. And once we had a compiled draft, the feedback and input from the rest of the board was wonderful. And in general, we are very pleased with the document, both in the content and the way it was written. And we're suggesting how to make a good document better. And so it's really mostly about encouragement of the effort to establish adaptive management and the appreciation of the authors for their deep understanding of what they're attempting to accomplish here. And a few bits here and there of suggestions of how to improve. So this was well received by Tracy and John and let's see who else weighed in. Jay, you did, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you all for making it such a pleasant task.
Discussion?
We don't get many pleasant tasks, so, yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that this was a pleasant task because I think that we'd agonized previously over adaptive management and were concerned that there didn't seem to be a clear grasp of even what the concept implied, much less the operations. And here we had something that really demonstrated an understanding of it. So I think, David, you're to be commended for putting together a good draft on this.
Liz?
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm not so good with the mic. Yeah, I thought, I was really pleased with the document, and I'm pleased with this draft that's before us as well. One of the things that I really liked was the inclusion of the section on experimentation and seeing it more as an opportunity than a challenge, and some of the things that you articulated in that. So I just wanted to commend you for that.
Oh, thank you. See how pleasant that is?
Yeah. I agree. This is going to be one of the most easiest things to review and most pleasantly reviewed documents we've seen for some time. Additional comments? Do I hear a motion? Motion to approve? Okay. Second? Any discussion? Any comments from public comments? Oh, apparently we have one. Great. Lauren Volpe.
Hi, I'm Laura Volpe with the State and Federal Water Contractors Agency. We had submitted some written comments to Department of, Delta Science program, and I wanted to reiterate some of those comments here. So we also support the development of an adaptive management program for EcoRestore, and also felt the document was very strong, especially with regard to addressing the right components of science, governance, and funding. We also agree with the setting up a program level as well as a project level review of the plan. We just had a couple of comments that we thought could make it a better document. The first was separating out the evaluate function versus the respond function in the adaptive management cycle. We feel that the evaluate part is done by a different group of people than the respond part. Evaluate is usually done by scientists, evaluating data, synthesizing data, etc., whereas the respond part is really the management and the decision makers. So separating those two functions out because they're very different both in terms of who does it as well as the content. And then we also recommend prioritizing the EcoRestore objectives that meet the BIOP requirements. There was additional habitat of floodplain and carbon sequestration habitat that is added to the EcoRestore Adaptive Management Plan. And we feel that focusing on the biological opinion requirements of tidal wetland restoration and the floodplain restoration should be prioritized if there's, limited funding, et cetera. We also had some general comments and suggestion on the development of an actual adaptive management plan as opposed to the white paper. And we feel that setting objectives for each habitat, species, and ecosystem function that is of concern and to be evaluated in the plan is needed, as well as identifying the key uncertainties associated with each of those objectives. And then for each of the objectives having outcomes, a baseline, specific targets or goals that are trying to be met for each of those objectives, having triggers that trigger management actions if those objectives look like they're not going to be met, and then metrics for measurement as well as timeframes for which the objectives are likely to be met. So we think those are all key elements of an adaptive management plan. So overall, we support the white paper and the development of an adaptive management plan.
Thank you very much. Questions from board members? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? It's unanimous. Another memo crossed off the list. Yes.
Could her comments be put in writing for the writing team?
That would be wonderful. Yeah. I think so.
Our comments have been submitted to Lauren Hastings of the Delta Science Program in a letter as well as annotated on the actual white paper document.
Very good.
So
Thank you. Martina, is that blue card for this item or a later item? Okay. Status of the comprehensive assessment of monitoring enterprise planting. Could we make this title longer next time? This is really kind of too concise.
Thank you, Jay. We met this morning to go over a draft of the RFP that would actually be put out for a consultant to do the project that we've been talking about for several months now. Next week, all of you will be receiving a copy of the RFP for your comments. We're on a very short time frame, so we would appreciate comments as soon as possible, perhaps within a week, but remembering that this will be an ongoing process, that you can add comments later through the subcommittee. The subcommittee has reviewed the documents and will have made some comments as well. Remember, this is basically based on the prospectus that all of you reviewed before, so this is it's not a totally new document. We would request, because of the short time frame, that we want to get this out as possible, that we get your substantial concerns, not so much wordsmithing. We've been through a lot of that thus far. The RFP will have a 45-day period for proposals to be submitted, and a subset of the DISB will be involved in reviewing the proposals and the interviews of the appropriate consultant. So I think that this is moving along very well. I want to thank Reiner for his help and Darcy in terms of getting this to this point so quickly.
Great. So hope get your comments in within a week after the next couple of days when that arrives in your inbox. comments from the board on monitoring? Questions? Any public comments on this item? Okay, moving along. Status of water quality thematic review. Liz?
Yeah, so we are continuing to make progress on that review, moving slowly because we're still getting more feedback. So, for example, just this past week, we had a phone meeting to talk about mercury in the Delta, and there was a recent meeting to discuss constituents of emerging concern. So we are pulling together the results from the survey that we conducted. We have sort of both a graphical and a text summary of that document, but we're also still receiving input. And I think, for me, at least, the challenge is at what point will we sort of say, well, we've got all of the inputs that we need and we're beginning to write the review. It's sort of an ongoing and evolving topic, and so there'll be a point where we'll have to stop receiving inputs and put those out for consideration. But maybe, I don't know if Tracy or Vince want to add to that.
Good job.
Great. Thank you. Any questions, comments from the board? Any questions, comments on this from the audience? Okay. Delta is an evolving place. Outreach, next steps. Dick. We had a very successful meeting last night, I thought.
Yeah, I think the outreach we did last night was phenomenal, and I wish we could do some more of that, and that may be the best way to do it. Keep this up, but that would certainly be a way we could keep this report alive and well. And otherwise, being a scientist, I'm not into promoting. I just, we're accustomed to letting stuff go out into the literature, and there it is. But if the staff has more suggestions, I think we should be open to those. And I do know we have several comments from the audience that we should consider.
Okay. Comments, board?
Darcy?
I just want to say thank you to Dick. I thought your presentation last night and the discussion that you catalyzed it was good for all the members of the board. So we really appreciate your efforts on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say I don't think we have specific suggestions, but we'd be happy to support however you would want to roll that out. So we can have a follow-up meeting. Reiner, I don't know if you have thoughts, but if the public has comments on that, that would be helpful for us as well.
Okay. John?
I think you're right that this is a sort of thing that scientists put their thoughts out there and assume that others are going to then grasp onto their thoughts as if there's some great wisdom contained in that, which of course is true. But in practice, it doesn't work that way. It strikes me, we've talked about op-eds at various points. I'm not sure whether this is the appropriate vehicle for this, but I think some kind of written essay, op-ed, and I'm not sure what the appropriate outlet is, but something that would draw attention to the importance of this issue in the context of the scientific framework that we usually think about it. Basically, I mean, one of the things that the Delta Reform Act and its language has compelled us to think about is this integration of science with the actual people aspect of it and the place aspect of it, which is often ignored. And as I think I pointed out last night, once you've started down that pathway, you can no longer think about things in the same way as science isolated from the people. So I think some kind of written essay, op-ed, and again, I'm not sure what the appropriate outlet might be, whether this is something that's probably more useful addressed to the scientific community that doesn't think about such things than to the more public community that wonders when are scientists actually going to wake up and recognize this. I think that might be worth pursuing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I chose not to bring that up, hoping somebody else would. On my own mind, for the 10-person board in public to approve signing their name to an op-ed, by the time the op-ed is written, it's already public record. That's kind of a strange way to write an op-ed, and that just came to me last night. That I guess we'd be on public record before we'd actually be releasing it, and I guess that's okay.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to have a op-ed be approved with the whole board. There'll be some newspapers that would say, well, what are we doing publishing an op-ed that's already in the public record? But I think having a letter or an op-ed that's signed by 2 or 3 members of the board, including, past chairs or whatever, that's probably sufficient. And then you can rely upon, refer to the board endorsed document.
Yeah.
That should be more than sufficient and much faster to produce.
That's a strategy.
We can, simply because we are board members does not preclude us acting as individuals.
That's right.
And I think we can do that. Also, I think simply because our proceedings are part of the public record doesn't mean that they are necessarily compellingly intelligible to the general public and the audiences we want to hit. So something that is written in a more relaxed and direct way would probably be more effective.
I agree.
Okay. I will take a stab at that with whoever would like to help me out.
Yes, Darcy?
I'm just thinking, I think it's nice to put an op-ed piece out. And Cliff, I'm looking over Jay's shoulder at you, but I do feel like there may be some ways to incorporate this in projects that we do, maybe with fellows in subsequent years. So I think I would like to volunteer, thinking about ways that we can incorporate some of this in the science program activities. And then, of course, we had that discussion about the science action agenda yesterday, and I'm not sure how that will be revised, but I would at least like to volunteer to help with some of the implementation.
Great.
Jay, one of the things that I'd like to add is that I think when we started this several years ago, trying to work out what we actually meant as a science board reviewing Delta's place, that these discussions have been incredibly helpful in terms of, for example, in the science action agenda, that this really came to our attention immediately, which it probably wouldn't have, the need for more of this, had it not been for Dick's work and Brian's input and all of the discussions we've had. So I think the effect of this is now going to underscore everything that we do, and I think that's the most positive outcome that we could hope for. Positively.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this has been a very educational process for the board. I'd like to see this document be educational for the whole range of Delta activities. It's really just a beginning, but the only place you get anywhere is by beginning. It's certainly been the most difficult review we've ever done, I think, thematically. But like the most difficult classes I took in college, they were usually the ones I learned the most from. One of the things I think we could help with in the next generation of thought on this is how does Delta as place integrate with the other co-equal goals? These are all sort of two-way streets, I think, in making this thing work for for a very complex system like what we've got here. Dick?
Press the wrong button. I think we will be getting several articles coming out, probably one on indigenous knowledge that Joy and Michelle Stevens are working on that stems from our activities. Liz did a lot of work on coupled human-natural systems, which then I augmented a bit, and I think we could at least generate a commentary for San Francisco Estuarine Watershed Science that, coupled human-natural systems thinking has been around for a long time, and it hasn't been going on here.
Back to Alexander von Humboldt, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably since Alexander, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some things I've been hearing, and I too think that the issuing of this report and the thinking that you put into it over multiple years and the growing process and what you ended up with does send a very clear message to me, and in particular the final recommendation that you have about recommending an ongoing research program in the Delta as an evolving place is something that we really need to work hard to make happen. I can tell you that we've had some small successes here of late. The latest Science Fellows competition had 2 projects that really do fit, I think, in this category. We need to build on that momentum, and we need to get, as Dick said, these coupled human and natural systems. You need to get the scientists working in both of those areas working together. And if we can find ways to facilitate that and then support the students who will actually do the work, I think we can make progress on this. And so I really see this as a way to begin to build momentum and make this kind of support that you suggest is very badly needed become a reality in the next few years. And I certainly will work with Darcy and others on the staff to try to promote this. And if it's well articulated in the science action agenda, that will also make it easier for us to sell that to some of the interagency efforts that might be going forward that relate to the science agenda in the future, and get more of this social science and human and coupled system type thinking into those PSPs.
Great. Any further comments? Any public comments on this? Mark Pruner, please come up and tell us more.
Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Chair, to tell you more. My comments fall into 2 categories. Category 1 would be a request that you consider a set of errata that I have to propose to the report that was issued, that you voted on April 13. And again, I apologize, I was traveling and unable to attend. If you all have a copy of the report in front of you or on your screens, that would be helpful. If not, I'm more than glad to read what I have in mind. Turn to page 1 if you have a copy of the report. Let me just show folks on TV what we're looking at, so we're clear. We don't have line numbers here, but I'm going to refer to sections, paragraphs, and line numbers in my business. That's what we do to move things along. First of all, in the middle of the page, under the 2 paragraphs titled Purpose of this Review, beginning in line 2, there's a quotation of Water Code section 85054. It's properly notated at the end of the section. The statutory section that is being quoted, I believe, is missing the first word of the key phrase of the statutory element you're intending to refer to. The quote here in line 2 begins with the word be, which is, I think we all remember from English, a rather nondescript passive verb. The statute actually adds the word shall in front of the word be. That's what the statute says, and I would request as a matter of an errata, the addition of the word shall in front of the word be. It more accurately reflects the statute. It's a fuller explanation of, I think, of what it helps in what follows, and helps, frankly, your report. Number 2, moving to, still on page, all these are on page 1, under the last section titled Reasons, paragraph 1, line 5. The last word in that sentence is not the sentence, I'm sorry, the line is implies. I just want to suggest that the statute, 85054 again, doesn't imply that these values be considered. The statute is expressly clear. The word shall is used, and shall is clear. It means a reason. These things must be done. It's not by way of implication, not by hope, not by dream, not by happenstance, and shall. So I would request that the word implies be deleted, and in its place the word requires or some grammatical equivalent be written there at the end of line 5. Number 3, moving down to line 6, in front of the word natural, which goes, the phrase is natural resources. The co-equal goals are water reliability and habitat restoration. Again, that's what the statute says. It seems to me when I just, as a layperson, read natural resources, I don't capture water reliability or the concept of water reliability within the meaning of the words natural resources. So again, to be clear and faithful to the actual statute that's being discussed in this section, and there are several other places where these phrases are and statute are enshrined. 85054 is just one, that in front of the word natural add water reliability and, so that toward the end of the sentence it reads policies and management decisions about water reliability and natural resources, or if you want to say habitat restoration, of course that's even more faithful to what the statute actually says. So I'm just suggesting that leaving out water reliability from this sentence deletes an important element of what the statute actually says, and therefore it's an errata. 4th, moving to line 7, the second word of line 7 is the word may. Following what my prior comments have been, the statute this is not a permissive thing. The consideration of Delta's place is not permissive, it's mandatory. And the word may implies that the statute says, well, you can or cannot consider whatever you choose. That's not what the legislature said, nor is that the law in California. I would suggest just delete the word may, and the word require, I think, is sufficient. Then lastly, we've got these 3 words, human history, culture, and values. The statute actually refers to unique, cultural, recreational, natural resource, and agricultural values. So agricultural values are left off, number 1. Recreation is left off, number 2.
Is an agricultural value not a value?
Exactly my point. Agricultural values are enshrined in the statute, but not in your report in the sentence here.
Yeah, the statute's in the statute. I'm not
It is.
sure why we need to repeat the statute.
Here's why. If you add the word values, and I'm going to read this as a layperson, I'm not going to know exactly what values you're referring to. It appears to me like a wide open door of what values there might be. I can add 25 other values. It may not fit into the 4 categories
And that might
established
be
by.
what we meant.
It might be. If that's what you meant, then we now have clarification on the record that that's what you possibly meant. I don't think that's what the statute says.
That's not what the statute says, as a matter of fact.
And frankly, if that's what you intend to accomplish, then
I think
let's leave it the way it is.
My impression was we meant that as a fairly broad statement.
I did, yes. But if your report is intended to leave values as an open-ended term, then certainly that's within your discretion to indicate that. That's the sum of the errata suggestions that I make to the report.
Thank you very much. Vince?
Yeah, one of the things, again, to remind everybody, one of the reasons we post these is to get comments in advance, and that really is, I think, the best time that we can get these comments while we're still discussing this as a board. So that would be
I
the
submitted
only
my
comment.
comments timely before the last meeting. It generally included, not in this detail, I think your paper, I believe, was dated April 3rd. I don't think it was posted until April 5th, which is a relatively short period of time to look at 10 pages from a layperson's perspective. But those constraints aside, I did timely provide comments that weren't general, and I said, please be faithful to the statute. I quoted the law. I include the reference to Water Code Section 054. I assumed that that level of comment, would be understood. But I'm here now to kind of follow up on the written comments that I timely submitted. But thank you for pointing that out.
John?
I don't know how or whether we are going to get into the practice of issuing errata and errata to errata of our reports. But if we're going to do this, I would suggest that my name is misspelled on the list of...
I thought we were having this discussion. It sure is. Look at that.
Yeah.
I think now we have an important reason to straighten this out a little bit. I'm comfortable accepting the friendly amendment of inserting the shall before the be, and I think that's the really critical point you're making here. The further suggestions are a little bit maybe less necessary, but we definitely want to spell John's name correctly.
And I would add, too, the term errata means that we did something wrong as opposed to a different opinion about what we did. So the quote starting at B is actually correct. So it's not really an errata in the classic sense of errata.
I just thank you for bringing that up, and I hear that commonly. I would just suggest that errata does have to do with technical issues, but words have meaning, and so if the meaning is incorrect, then that's what I'm responding to.
I actually have some preference for the second cluster of I would agree with Vincent and with Vic on the first one, but on the second larger cluster of changes you suggest, I actually prefer the wording we have here because it's broader, in fact, than the statute. It implies a greater range, potentially greater range of values that may be required, and that is implied, I think, in the statute, or certainly the discussion around that statute. So I don't know that we would want to necessarily restrict ourselves just to the statute in this case, because there are likely to be additional values other than those that are mentioned in the statute that seem relevant to the spirit of the Delta as an evolving place. So I would not want, in furtherance of your point, I would not want to constrict this wording.
I appreciate the broader reading of the statute. Thank you.
If that's not a misreading of what our intent was. Brian?
Just a process matter. With U.S. Geological Survey reports, I've been involved with changes that have been made that are corrections. But what happens is that the online version of the report simply has something attached to it that says, here are the changes that have been made since the report was first put up. And it just says they're changes.
Yeah. I think we could, in the case of these first two, I would call them just corrections. Comment. Do we need to have a motion for making corrections to this document?
Still, I vote for
changes?
just changes. It's a neutral term.
Okay. Do we have a motion to make any changes?
I guess if the primary author can...
There is no primary author in any of our documents.
There's no longer any primary author because it's been approved by the board, so I'm ready to move that we accept spelling John's name correctly and inserting shall in front of the be in that earlier paragraph, the middle paragraph there.
Joy?
What about the may take out the may on the last line of that paragraph?
We can change that to will.
Decisions may require consideration, or decisions require consideration?
I think if we change that to will require consideration, it always requires consideration, so the consideration is enough of a modifier for me, so that we can just say will instead of may.
Will consider?
Yeah. Will require the consideration of it.
Right. That should be included in the motion.
I will add that as a friendly amendment to the motion.
Any discussion? Any comments from the public? Any more discussion? No discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? I'm going to abstain because I really don't want to encourage people to come in and wordsmith our documents after the fact over largely minor issues, much as I appreciate the effort and the attention to detail. I think we don't want to encourage a lot of this to happen. But these are good. Certainly John's name, we deserve to spell his name correctly. Yeah.
Can we abstain just on the John change?
Okay. Thank you all thank you very much, Mark. Really appreciate it.
As I mentioned in my first sentence, I have two matters,
two matters.
subjects.
Okay.
So
Another
that was one.
Okay.
The second is that one of my, I came forward quickly. One of my hats, I'm the chair of the Clarksburg Fire Protection District. We're the closest level of local government to the people. We provide fire and life safety protection services and assess folks, and our constituents all know where we live. So it's provides a great level of accountability, which I appreciate. One of the other hats that I wear in the Delta is I chair the Delta Protection Advisory Committee. That's the official advisory body to the Delta Protection Commission. We're composed of, I believe it's 17 different interest groups. That covers pretty much A to Z, all of the interests in the Delta, water contractors, people who live in the Delta, recreational interests, environmental groups, etc. So I think we are, as I have told people periodically, my committee members, we're really designed to disagree. And in fact, some folks are suing each other, not in that forum, but outside. One of the goals, one of the programs, the initiatives that I intend to push forward a bit more this coming year is a focus on this Delta's Place concept and advising specifically the Delta Protection Commission on what Water Code Section 85054 and related statutes mean. So my intention is to embark on that on that initiative and then proceed through what I think, as you pointed out, the DPC is the proper primary place for a statement of what those values mean. The genesis should come from that agency. My question is, maybe if this is not the forum, please tell me to talk to you privately, but I'm not clear what role your body might have as we develop that formulation. Should we come to you periodically? Should we report? Should we seek some kind of guidance as we go along? Should we just sort of come to you when the final product is done and let you conduct a more formal review and call it good? What would you advise and suggest?
Dick?
Yeah, I've been the one that's insisting that our board review the science as the science gets done, but not be reviewing decisions or the plans for the science getting done, though I appreciate the problem of how do you get a process started up and moving, but that our role is really to say, is the science that is being done good enough, adequate, best available, And when we see things missing, then that's when we should be speaking up. So my preference would be to, be speaking to this issue again in 4 more years when we're required by the law to review it.
We are the Delta Independent Science Board, so in principle, we can review anything we darn well decide to that's related to the Delta. Agencies have come before us with things that they would like us to consider reviewing. People make suggestions to us of things that they would like us to consider reviewing. And we often have discussions between agency people and just regular folks as individuals, and sometimes as a board, and sometimes just as the group of officers of this august committee, about whether we should review something or in what form it should be or what time or whether it's appropriate for us to review at all. So if you have something that you would like us to review, I would talk with 1 or 2 board members first or one of the officers, and then see how well that fits with what we see as our capabilities and our role and our, frankly, our bandwidth. Because one of the prices of success in this is you get overwhelmed with things to review, and that's slowly happening to us as we get asked to review more things. So you now have a little bit better sense of what it takes for us to do a review, and how we try to take that fairly seriously. So hopefully this is informative to you in making a pitch, if you will, if you want, for us to review something.
I hear what you're saying. I think, frankly, as I understand values, they're not something you can put in a test tube and measure in a more natural science way. Of course, I think we all know that. And values, I believe values are best formulated and described by the folks that hold those values, by the people that are directly impacted by those values. My analogy is to the Declaration of Independence. We didn't outsource that to the superpowers of the day. So right. I'm thinking that Delta values really ought to come from Delta folks, not from an outside source. But I understand that process may differ. My intention then would be to, in consultation with maybe the new chair, this will be down the road a bit, maybe seek comments on process and other factors that are material in developing a final product, so that you're just not dumped on a final project and that you haven't heard about.
We are the Delta Independent Science Board, not the Delta Independent Humanities Board, but there's some interpretation that we can make around that, and there's certainly fields of sociology and anthropology and psychology where they try to apply a range of scientific methods on values, social geography, and there's quite a lot written from a scientific perspective on values. So in principle, I think it's not a field foreign to our purview.
Very good. And I take it from your report that as the professor has said, once the door's open, the door's open. And I think the door's been open at least to some degree. So I'll take that as we'll take this as one step at a time. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Have I captured the sense of the board? We're good. Okay.
All right. Thank
you very much. By the way, this is my working binder for Delta's place. I expect it to grow some more.
Maybe there's some literature in there that we missed on our review. Barbara Daly.
Thank you for allowing me to speak again on this agenda item. This is my binder on Delta as Place, which I brought along today to share a couple of things with you and to offer you foundationally where we are at today as Delta as Place, as I told you last night, I have a tourism business, and I do go outside of the primary delta. I can go to Stockton, I go to Brentwood, other places that are in the secondary zone of the delta. Actually, I go all over California. I try to be very flexible, but I just wanted to say that in the spirit of the Delta as an evolving place, I know you've looked back at a lot of history. Sometimes it's good to look at where we are right now, and that's what I can offer you. I want to offer, if I can facilitate in any way, as Mark was saying, the Delta Protection Commission has an advisory board, and I'm on that advisory board as well. I'm a member. The last 3 years, I've been a member as a public advocate, and I've been selected to be a member of the as a business advocate for the next 3 years. So if I may have your permission, I'm not going to pass around this whole binder, but I would like to pass these around that will really give you a taste and flavor of the things I would be showing you if you took my tour, which I offer all of you. Right now, and we can set a date, and you'll see many of these and a lot more. These are just a few pictures.
Great.
Do you have any questions or anything else I could do to help?
Do you have any estimate of the size of the tourism economy for the Delta?
Well, it's in its beginnings, but I believe that the recreation economy is the second largest economy in the Delta, with agriculture being first, and recreation has been sorely hit in the last few years because of the drought and because of the water hyacinth and other reasons. I expect that to really improve now that we've had such a good wet season. But tourism is something that has been, people have been afraid to come out here, I do believe, because there are at least 60 islands and not a lot of gas stations, and there hasn't been really a map to show people how to get around. So last night I did pass out the map, a land map that I designed and had published. I published 10,000 of them distributed 10,000 of them in the last 2 years, and my goal is right now to distribute over 200,000 of them within the next year, so that people will be invited to come into this Delta. We have wineries now. We have all of the history to educate people on the beautiful drive along the Sacramento River. There's so many different sides of the Delta for people to come and see. Of course, the nature, the sandhill cranes, the flyaway, all of that. So there's a lot to let people know is here. I expect there'll be more tourism sites and for people to stop, as well as for and businesses that actually focus on tourism.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Brian?
So, Barbara, how will you figure out the success of those efforts?
How will I figure out the success?
We're into performance measures here.
Well, I expect that I'm going to hear verbally from the businesses that I have on the map that they're going to show a big increase in activity, because I have cited over 200 hotels to place these maps in Sacramento, as well as San Francisco, another 200 places in San Francisco, including Pier 39. And they also have a touch screen board where many of these pictures, if they are interested in looking at what can I see in the Delta, they can touch the screen and these pictures will go through. And then also the 17 California Welcome Centers. We're going to have these maps and this information in the 17 California Welcome Centers. So that I expect to be a big influx of new people into the Delta. And so there might be something on my website or on the map itself where there could be some kind of I'm not sure. I'm still working on that one. Not my strong point, I guess. Yeah.
Great.
Anything else?
Yeah.
May I?
Please, go right ahead. Thank you very much. The Delta is a great place for recreation and tourism. Anything else on this item? All right, well then let's move along to the State of Bay Delta Science Retrospective with Dick Norgaard, Mike Healey, and Mike Dettinger.
So Jay, we decided that I would start with some slides and then turn it over to the editorial board and the ISB for discussion.
Mics here.
Get them settled. We should get your nameplate, Dick. Okay. So, yes, we have our editorial board here, Michael Healey, University of British Columbia, Mike Dettinger, USGS, and Dick Norgaard, University of California, Berkeley, and also a member of the ISB. And I served as a managing editor along with Maggie Chrisman. So the reason why we're here, the Delta Science Plan actually states that the Independent Science Board would review the state of Bay Delta science. And as you all know, we had most of these papers printed in the online journal, San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science. So they underwent peer review as part of that journal process. So we thought we would have the ISB do a retrospective and do a look back, help us think about ways that we could think about doing this next time around, any ideas on the product itself and how to improve the process. Oh, I think I have the control. Okay. So just as a reminder, State of Bay Delta Science is part of the Delta Science Strategy along with the Delta Science Plan and the Science Action Agenda. And it's a strategy to achieve One Delta, One Science. We talked a little bit, or the board talked about the Science Action Agenda yesterday, and if you've noted, some of the actions are derived from the State of Bay Delta Science 2016. So those two processes are linked. State of Bay Delta Science would then, or Science Action Agenda, those actions would eventually be incorporated into the State of Bay Delta Science, the next iteration. So this time around, SBDS 2016, we had the editorial board go through significant amounts of responses from senior scientists and managers working in the Delta to figure out which issues were the highest priority. And then from there, they culled down a list and added a couple as time went on. We had 15 topical peer-reviewed papers from a total of, actually it's probably more than 50 authors, again published in the online journals Views. The summary for policymakers, which all of you should have, and there are copies on the desk over here. The Delta on Fast Forward, Thinking Beyond the Next Crisis, that rolled out in time for the Bay Delta Science Conference in 2016. It was also featured at the DPIC, the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting. And then also we had a session at the Bay Delta Science Conference that had discussions between policymakers and the authors of individual chapters, and folks thought that that was a really good session. One thing to highlight, and I'm going to turn to this next, we have a new website for accessing content from both 2008 and the 2016 versions. Our goal is to get this to be a living document, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But here is what the front page of the website looks like, and the URLs are down there. There's two of them. I think that's kind of funny, but we have two. Our goal in the science program is to maintain this web presence and highlight as we're going through this living document, keep everything here. Some of the content, this is hard to see, but the website allows you to browse by topic. You can go to each of the papers either through the online journal, or you can gather them all together in one giant PDF. It's about 500 pages. And there's all sorts of key points that are summarized for each article, and then it lists the authors and the title. And then we also have an area where we can have feedback. Right now, that's just a web, like an email address, but we are open to ideas on how to make this more of an interactive forum for people to have discussions as we're moving forward through this idea of a living document. So just a few things here, and then the editorial board can speak for themselves. But so Maggie and I, we recognize some challenges here, that we had a lot of participants this time around. The 2016 and 2008 versions are very different. I like both of them, but they're very different. So it might be useful for the ISB to weigh in on the book version that we had in 2008, which I believe had 8 chapters, and then this version, which has the 15 chapters in the online journal, and with just the glossy summary. Some comments from the editorial board. It was difficult to maintain the focus as a project when the editorial board was not involved in the peer review process. So once the papers went to the online journal, the editorial board and managing editors didn't have any say in that process. And I'll have some comments from authors about that as well. The State of Bay Delta Science is not the same as the accumulation of science since the prior report. And this was difficult to convey to authors. And hardly any of the authors explored policy implications of the science. And then finally, rethinking the science together should be a high priority of the effort, so we should encourage involvement of authors from different research units. So some of the author feedback, based on just a short survey for lead authors, authors thought that the instructions were not clear to everybody. Many of them thought peer review was important, but not all thought it was important. However, 90% that responded said that it was an important aspect to maintain in the future. And one of the downsides was the double review by the editorial board and then by the journal. It was challenging to some of the authors, and it created some issues with timing. And I'll let the editorial board speak to that as well, but from a managing editor perspective, I don't know how we could avoid that double process. 90% of authors also responded that the web-based open access content was important, but only 20% responded that a hard copy version ought to be produced. Certainly with that 500 pages, we saved some trees by not printing that out. And then this is kind of a funny statistic, but 50% of authors responded that creating a forum is important. I think the editorial board believes that's important, so I'll let them speak to that. And then just some final thoughts here. So as I said, the science program, we're dedicated to making this a living document, and we would like some thoughts from the ISB on how to do that. And then what should the next iteration, which should be in 2020, how would the ISB like to be involved? And would that be in reviewing? Would that be in helping us derive the science, or, point us to directions of topics? And then next time, I'm not going to speak for them, but I seem to remember that there was some feeling that maybe not all of the editorial board members would be participating next time. So would it be an entirely new editorial board? Would we have some participants continue just for continuity's sake? So just some ideas around that. And, oh, I'm not on this right slide. Sorry. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to the editorial board. And we didn't talk about how we would do this, but I'm sure you all will work it out. And do you have any questions for me right now? Okay.
Well, in case any of you don't know, I'm Mike Healey. I'm the foreigner on the editorial board. Just to make sure this has actually some kind of international context. The People's Republic of Canada, that's right.
People's Republic of Berkeley.
Yeah. I want to begin by saying I think the intermittent SBDS science compilations for the Delta, or syntheses, or whatever we want to call them, are really important. So even though the hope is to make this a sort of living document where new bits can be added or things can be updated as we go along, I think sort of taking that step back and trying to pull it all together at some interval. When we originally did this, we thought it would be every 4 or 5 years, but of course things drag on. And of course you should know that the initial steps for SBDS 2016 began in 2013. It was supposed to be SBDS 2015, but the way things drag on, it didn't come out until 2016. So based on my experience with other compilations, the turnaround on this one was actually sort of average or a little fast. So if it's going to be done again, you can anticipate it's going to be a 3 or 4 year process in any event. That'll bring me briefly back to Darcy's comment. You might think about having a new editorial board, because by that time I may well be drooling into a cup, and so I might not be a very good choice for the editorial board. I think what was envisioned at the beginning, and this is really Peter Goodwin's initiated this iteration, and he had the vision that we would have a set of chapters that dealt as scientific documents with the technical aspects of the science of the Delta, but each of those would have associated with it a short synthesis for policymakers that would be written in a form that policymakers could understand. Well, that proved to be a very difficult thing for our authors to do. And for one reason, because of course they were all late. They were all tardy in handing in their drafts, and we were pushing to get this thing done and trying to get them to sit down and think about, what were the policy implications of the science that they had summarized was proving to be difficult. We got some comments, but they obviously weren't well thought out. So in the end, the three of us wrote a sort of policy perspective based on the chapters that we had. It doesn't necessarily reflect the views of the authors. In some cases we drew from what the authors had said, but many times we made it up ourselves from what we'd read in the chapters. So that's really our contribution to the process. So again, if you want this document to somehow speak to policymakers, I think you have to think through the process carefully about how you're going to accomplish that. I think that 2007-8 version was really more directed for policymakers. The 2016 version is really pointed more towards the scientific and technical people in the Delta who hopefully will find it useful. And you're always trying to juggle that interrelationship between the science and the policy, and at least so far we haven't found the perfect solution to bringing those two things together. But there, of course, are new things coming all the time that are going to require, or hopefully will require, some kind of written synthesis. We just talked about one earlier, this human ecological linked systems that we haven't had a chapter on in any of the two SBDSs, and I can certainly envision with the Delta's place issue coming to the fore that would be an obvious chapter for either a standalone article or a new SBDS. Anyway, I do want to say that I've really appreciated having the opportunity to be involved in putting these two things together, and to reemphasize that I think it's a really critical thing to do from time to time for the Delta Science Program.
I guess I'll continue. I come from serving on the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which have many more scientists participating, and then thinking about, well, what should we be doing in the Delta? And it really, to me, is an opportunity to build community of Delta scientists and to get Delta scientists talking to each other. And admittedly, we have conferences every year, biennial, from different points of view, perspectives that do that very well. But this document could also do that, and in some ways, we're still missing that opportunity. That one way to get more coordination between the authors and the chapters, a lot of the editorial board had to step in and say, well, this has already been covered in this document, or this chapter didn't cover that, so could you cover it over here in this chapter? There's material that's betwixt and between. And in the IPCC, for example, that would be done at the meetings of the authors, where you're bringing 350 authors together from around the world at some point, convenient like New Zealand. Yes, that was done. But again, I think some of the building of One Delta, One Science could be enhanced through the State of Bay Delta Science, and some of the reducing of the heavy-handed work of the editorial board could be done through meetings of the scientists together. And those meetings also serve as deadlines that, by the time you're in this meeting, you better have done something so that you're ready for the meeting. It does increase the budget. On the other hand, maybe we did not allocate the budget as optimally or as well as we could have. I was the one that, at the beginning of the process, was concerned that the State of Bay Delta Science is just not the accumulation of science, but where's the State of Bay Delta Science in relation to a larger picture and the needs for science, both from the larger picture from what we know from climate change and biodiversity loss globally, but also the picture from what are the needs of the science from a policy perspective. And that was difficult to convey to the authors, and then I think we were beginning to convey it in the process, and there was some kickback on that. But I think that is an issue in the next round, that we're not just accumulating, we're not just summarizing the state of the science from what it was in 2008, but we're trying to say, what are the needs, and are we keeping up with the needs? And that should be a process of the scientists themselves asking that question. And in this round, it was the editorial board that kind of stepped in and asked that question, or answered that question as best we could. I think in the future we need to address that.
So I'd just like to make a couple comments. I suppose they're almost procedural for next time. As Darcy mentioned, it was difficult to maintain a focus as a project, is the term she used, when we weren't involved in the peer review process. I agree with the authors. I think I agree with everyone that the peer review, incorporating a full-on peer review process this time makes me at least more confident in the product that we produced. Certainly down into the details, I'm much more confident with what we produced. The previous one was great, but it was the work of comparatively a handful of authors, and this time we got both a lot more authors involved, but we also had that rigorous review process. Nonetheless, that was only one motivation for going with the journal article approach, and another motivation was that it was a way to basically we allowed the journals to do a lot of the layout and the like in putting together the actual final version of the product. And it seems to me that we somehow need to sort of balance those two advantages, if you will. In particular, in the 2008 SBDS, the editorial board and a small number of other people read the entire thing from beginning to end before it was released. This time we really we didn't see it after we said, you probably better go ahead and send it into the journal now. We didn't see the revisions, and some of the articles, some of the chapters changed a bit, not so much in their thrust, but in what was in and what was out, and that sort of stuff. And that's more than just, managing it as a project. That is, what is the synthesis that's being created? We have 15 chapters that were put through the peer review process independently of each other. And I think that's an issue that we have to somehow deal with in the future versions of this. I agree with Mike that the getting this online as a living and treating it as a living document is absolutely critical, because new issues come up, new findings come up. We might as well keep this thing up to date. But I also agree that periodically you want to step back, throw everything out, and say, okay, really, where are we now? Otherwise, all you see are increments rather than any transformation that happens in the science. So I guess part of what I'm saying is that we need to, rather than backing away from the double review issue that was raised by the authors, they felt sort of double jeopardied on this thing. I think we need to double down. And really, it should have been a triple review, frankly. We needed to have the editorial board reviewing things up front, peer review, and then the editorial board getting a chance to at least weigh in as the revisions, before the revisions went in, or as the revisions went into the journal, to somehow have, could well be. Yeah. And I think that's mostly what I want. I think that I'll just reiterate that I really think that the online version of this is where we ought to be focusing for the near term. I will say, perhaps naively, that I think that if we could have the next time around when we do a major reboot of this thing, if we can have the development of the online presence be in parallel with the development of the document itself, with the authors actually involved in that process, rather than having the online version be sort of an extract of what the technical authors put together. That is about the only way I can see, again, perhaps naively, but the only way I can see us being able to shake the policy implications out of our authors, because most of our authors are frankly just not comfortable. It's not just a policy, it's not a sort of, objectivity thing. It's just, frankly, a lot of our authors don't feel that they have the background to make policy, to extract the policy implications. But if the online, more public presence was something that they were involved in, I think it might be a way to get them to step up and actually provide, it forces them to think about that, and that would be the only other suggestion I would have for next time.
I guess I've got a couple of comments or questions, one of which has to do with this policy issue, and I'm as guilty as any of the authors in terms of failing to address and recognize the policy implications of what we put together on landscape ecology. So I'm wondering, and I agree it's hard for scientists to think that way, but I'm wondering how, short of looking 4 years ahead, we can begin to remedy that at this point. And I'm wondering if coming back to the lead authors of the chapters with some explicit direction and some encouragement and some linkages to encourage them to perhaps put together an addendum to their contribution that deals explicitly with, okay, you've written on landscape ecology. What do you see as the policy implications of this for the Delta? And let's really try to address it directly. I don't know whether that would be productive. It probably wouldn't work for all of the chapters, but I think it could work for some of them. So that's one comment. The other comment that I'd make is really a question of how it's fine to talk about making this a living document, but those are just the words. And I'm wondering what is the mechanism for doing that? Who is involved in making sure that the chapters remain on life support and continue moving forward? Is this something that the lead authors are involved in? Is this something that the Delta Science Program takes charge of? The Editorial Board assumes the responsibility for doing this? And what sort of life signs do you try to incorporate into a living document? I can think of it again in terms of the chapter that I was lead on, and come back in a year or so and look at things and say, okay, we had some thoughts there, some recommendations of a sort. If we look at it again, what do we see in terms of how this is developing in the Delta? So it's just sort of pursuing that a little bit further.
I'd like to comment on both your points, John. I think that in terms of, I guess my sense is, but it may just be because each of us has a particular background and we see things in a certain way, but I'm guessing that all of the scientists who are involved in writing these chapters know what the key policy issues are in the Delta, or at least in their area of expertise. And so it's this sort of linking the scientific information to policy implications that may be the stumbling block. And if they haven't been doing that, then it is something that requires a bit of practice and thought. So one way to try to address that, getting over that, if that is the stumbling block, would be to have meetings such as Dick was suggesting, like a workshop to bring certainly the lead authors and as many co-authors as possible together. And the purpose of the workshop is to talk about the policy implications of the work you did. And to come out of that workshop a report on policy implications of the science of the Delta. This is something the science program's been doing for years and is very good at organizing and running and then producing a product from. So that would be my first recommendation for taking some steps along the road to getting the scientists more comfortable with talking about the policy implications of their work. And in a sense, I think the same process could be used for intermittent examinations of what's been done on science in the past and what new needs to be done as far as the living document process is concerned. And my view is that the science program would have to be the focal agency for this, to taking the lead on, from time to time, seeking comment on where we are in certain issues. Do we need to get authors together to talk about perhaps updating their work, or do we need a whole new article or set of articles on some topics that are really important now, but we don't seem to have the science, even an assemblage of the science rather than a synthesis of the science that's needed to inform the policymakers. I know that puts a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of the science program, but they are sort of the spider in the middle of the web here and are, I think, ideally positioned to look after that sort of thing. Of course, with the help of the ISB.
Well, I was going to actually, the last bit, I agree that the science programs really got to be the ones sort of managing this process. It seems to me that, that has to happen just because they are the ones in all three corners of the diagram that Darcy showed us earlier. where I deviate a little bit is I think that I wouldn't necessarily put it on the ISB, although I have no objections to the ISB if they want to take that role. But I have been sort of picturing the science program really sort of managing that living document, but with sort of advice from your scientific advisory committee. That seems to me to be a nice intimate relationship, but with the horsepower to actually have some real confidence that not to put the onus on the lead scientist all the time or something like that. So.
I'm prepared to offer a significantly different model, and that is that the Independent Science Board does its reviews by gathering scientists together to write chapters for this living document, and the Independent Science Board serve interactively with a group of scientists writing that document. So they are assessing themselves under the jurisdiction of the Independent Science Board. And so it becomes a review of the Independent Science Board, but the participants in the review are as chapter authors. And as I see it now, we have some duplication going on that we could simplify, and this could make it a living document because the Independent Science Board is required to review the science on a schedule. But it's always better to get the community of scientists involved. And then, as speaking now as a member of the Independent Science Board, we would be the ones that would be sort of urging them and pushing them and asking questions, and also making those links to
policy.
To the policy.
Yeah, and in terms of the this extraction of policy implications, it seems to me that, as another one of the lead authors, that pretty quickly, even though I knew our objectives and all that, I kind of got into the mode of knowing that this was going through peer review, and knowing, sort of what a review paper in a peer-reviewed journal ends up looking like. And they routinely, I would say, are not all that policy opinionated. Let's just say that. I mean, it's just a reality of, I know that even if the journal wants it to be that way, you're facing reviewers, and I know what reviewers say and do and that sort of stuff. At this point, since the reviews were done, since the authors got their paper, blessed, there have been 3 extractions of it in terms of policies. We, the editorial board, tried our hand at one as the policy implications chapter of the SBDS. There's this thing, which feeds heavily on what we wrote, but which was, frankly, we worked to, I was out of it to a certain extent, but we worked to push it even further. And now, frankly, we've got a third version of what this means to the person who stumbles into the midst of the SBDS, who isn't necessarily a specialist or scientist, which is the online version. And I kind of go with perhaps a smaller version of what Dick suggested, which is, let's get the authors back together and say, here's 3 different versions of where what we think policymakers might want to take from what you said. What did we get right? What did we not get right? What would you rather we have said at this point? And that might be one way. It's not particularly effective for the future. We want to somehow shake it out of them more immediately in the future. But it's one way to try and really extract that sort of opinion and implication from our authors.
Vince?
And I think whenever a huge project like this comes to an end, there's always a temptation to think of what you didn't do and what could have been done better. And I think that the value of this, especially to someone who hasn't spent a lifetime working in the Delta, it's just invaluable. It really is an incredible accomplishment. One of the things that I was actually, there were a lot of young researchers that were co-authors on these papers, and sort of taking an idea from what you mentioned, to sort of have continual working groups, not on individual chapters, but on areas, and with young people taking the lead. And I think, Mike, what you said about the issue of journal review and peer review of the reviewers want the stuff that can be fully substantiated as opposed to opinions is always going to be one of the difficulties. And yet, if you have working groups, that's where that stuff can really get ironed out. But please don't, anybody that worked on this, don't emphasize this incredible role that you did for all of us that don't know all these details about the Delta. It really was an incredible piece of work.
Brian, I'm just going to go around here. Liz, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to echo what Vince said. It is an incredible piece of work and a great contribution to both the scientific and policy communities working here in the Delta, as well as outside the Delta. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from this system that can be extended to other systems. So I just have a couple of very small points. So one is about logistics. So you mentioned this disconnect between your work and the final product that appeared in the journal. And I know in the past I've been involved in some opportunities where I was guest editor for a journal. So I was wondering if that model might be useful here so that you would kind of retain control and input to the process along the entire project trajectory. So that was one. The other thing is I really enjoyed the session at the Bay Delta Science Conference where you paired authors with policy and manager experts. And so, maybe thinking about that in a couple of different ways, trying to pair scientists with managers right from the onset in the authorship of chapters. Another way to do it would be to ask some of the manager and policymakers to review the chapters so that they might be able to provide feedback, and they may be able to glean some points from the science that would be useful to policy and managers. So that's all.
Almost the exact same thoughts as Liz had, with the addition of the, I guess the journal already has a category of paper that's kind of a short opinion or perspective piece, and that some of the participants in that Bay Delta Science Conference, what would you call it, session, where the scientist and a policy person were paired, that those individuals could be asked to write something equivalent to a Nature News and Views piece.
Cliff?
I'd like to pose a question to the three editors. I think we were very, very fortunate in having the 2008 and 2006 versions of the State of Bay Delta Science be done by the same three editors. That often does not occur. A question I would have for the editors is, how did you go about the process of making decisions on what additional topics and what new chapters needed to be added?
Well, I think Darcy already gave you a thumbnail sketch of this. There was canvassing of senior managers and scientists in the Delta to get a list of what they thought were the critical topics that could be included in a new State of Bay Delta Science. And I think we got probably about 30 suggestions. And then we just used executive privilege and winnowed those down to the number that we ended up with. And the decisions, others should chime in, but it seems to me we're based primarily on looking at those comments, seeing how many people suggested the same topic. So that would suggest it was relatively high on priorities. But in some cases, we just made an executive decision to include or exclude certain things.
I'll just, pull aside the curtain for one moment on that. There were a couple of topics that we really did want chapters on and ultimately couldn't quite swing it in terms of authorship and the like. And frankly, something really close to Delta's place was one of those that we had that in mind, but we never could quite put the pieces together for it this time around.
Brian, do you have some more? Oh, okay, all right. Another thought on policy implications, and you're quite correct that most scientists don't have a lot of background or malice of forethought on policy implications of their work, which is to their detriment. I think the science actually gets better if you start thinking about some of these things, but it's certainly not the personal inclinations of a lot of folks. But one way that's sometimes done in these occasions is to find a pretty good journalist that is acquainted with the policy issues and have them have a conversation with the scientists and draw that out a little bit better. I think maybe that's a form that could be done. I'm a little bit. I think it's, as everyone has noted, the tremendous depth and breadth of these papers and their peer review is really a tremendous accomplishment. There's certainly some big gaps, I think, in the topics. Certainly on the water supply reliability side and the Delta's place side. It's almost like we have 47 ecology chapters and then one of each of the other two, which I think is disappointing. But I think it's still a tremendous accomplishment for the other areas. But it's almost a problem of success in that there's now so much volume there that it's good for the scientists, it's good for the young scientists in the narrow areas. But what about that new manager that came in, or that new employee that came into an agency, or a legislative staffer that's trying to figure out the whole darn thing? You have a couple of really nice chapters on the grand challenges and things like that, but we've just given them another impenetrable swamp from their perspective to get through, and that's where I thought the 2008 volume was really outstanding, and it came at a time when it was needed to have an authoritative statement of here are the major issues and here is the major science behind that. So I would encourage, thinking about how to get there from the weeds. Much as I like the weeds. Dick?
Yeah, I think the 2008 really did hit the sweet spot in terms of helping staff at a point when staffing was going up.
Yeah.
And we've missed that. It's hard to read.
But to me, that's the most
plus
important
bookends.
audience for this document is new staff coming in. And you always have people switching jobs and new staff coming in and new elected officials, new staffers to elected officials. There needs to be some relatively authoritative, independent, thoughtful statement of these issues, and written not for a scientific audience, but for a educated layperson audience.
I'll just say that I was a little bit surprised and happy to find that the science program put effectively both of them up online. I thought I had, I've told everyone who will listen that, don't throw away the 2008 document. This isn't that redone. This is a different document. I think with it online, and if we commit to making that also a living document, which frankly involves going back right now and seeing what we got right, what we got wrong in it, in that sense there, and carrying that along and keeping that up to date, I think we can, in some sense, maybe have the best of both worlds.
I agree entirely, Jay, and if it had been my decision again, I would have tried to do something that was a relook at the, to bring the 2008 version up to date. But, it was Peter who started this, and that wasn't his vision. And I have no objection to the collection of technical papers. I think they're a real contribution. But it does leave that gap of how do you inform new people coming on about issues in the Delta. I think the 2008 version is still not a bad introduction. Things haven't changed that much in terms of the major issues. But maybe the thing is to think about getting together a group of people to do something that would be for new people coming in, or even just to remind old people that, okay, here are things you really need to keep thinking about. But of course, remember that when you're making all these comments, you're talking to yourselves, because we aren't going to be around. Except maybe Dick, he'll be in front.
I've often thought, and I've mentioned this to Darcy a couple of times, that it would be worthwhile publishing in bound form all of these together, just to put it on the shelves of the major managers, just to remind people, yes, there is science out there, and there's a lot of it.
Oh, okay.
Just as physical presence. We don't actually have to have anything printed on the pages, just the binding is really what I'm looking for.
Maybe
because people will actually go online for it.
500 blank pages. But again, one of the suggestions that we made was that there should be produced a small number, maybe 100 or so presentation copies that are nicely bound and everything's there. And these are things you can hand out to these high-level people, and they can put it on their coffee table, they put their coffee cups on it, whatever. But it gives them this sort of physical, tangible sense that there's a lot of science out there to pay attention to.
I want the people that are paying for all this stuff to realize that they're getting something, and it's much more tangible, I think, if you give them something physically. And I would print up more than 100 copies. I'd take a toll of who'd be willing to pay for the additional cost of an additional copy, because once you're making 100 copies, it's almost as cheap to make 200 or 500. I don't think you'll get 3,000 out of this, but Vince?
One of the things in terms of talking about, the lack of policy implications that you hope were there, remember, we're not the only game in town. This is being picked up by the PPIC in all their recent reports. They're using that for information. Chris Austin's Maven's column is carrying things from it. Water Deeply is carrying things from it. So, it's going far beyond what the Delta Science Program or we're doing in terms of and that's going to reach the young people.
Right. And I think it's useful to look at the whole, range of wonderful papers, review papers that come out of this as a foundation, and what it's not. You don't stop the house with the foundation. You build more stuff up on top of it.
Yeah.
Well, I will say I really like Mike's idea of essentially a beginner's guide to Bay Delta science. I mean, I think that's, we've almost got it in the 2008 thing, but return and actually make that the objective. I think that's a marvelous goal.
I thought the Grand Challenges was a really excellent paper at the front end, but it would be nice to have more of a beginner's guide to the science that would follow on from that, so people could actually get a detailed orientation to what's going on in different areas of interest to them. Additional? Joy?
How about Delta, the movie, with a lot of aerial photography? It is marvelous to fly into Sacramento over the Delta, and I can envision a movie that describes the Delta as well as the science of the Delta, with some filmage from the next science symposium.
My recommendation would be to have a physical tour of the Delta for new people with half a dozen knowledgeable scientists along to talk about what's going on here, what this is all about, why we're looking at this particular part of the Delta, as a sort of 1 or 2 day orientation session for new staff.
My guess is that there's probably 100 new staff per year in the system, which is a big tour. but there might be 1,000 or 10,000 people, if you look at it a little more broadly, including the members of the public that might be interested in some kind of a product of that level.
Well, I was going to say, so you've got your 100 new, your turnover of 100 new staff. You know, I'm not sure what the number would be for new legislators and the like. I mean, frankly, they could use that exposure to the science. And there, I'm talking not strictly about the problems, but about the science and what they're getting for their money.
It's maybe a little bit off topic, but I think something that needs more attention in this whole area is public outreach. I mean, the people who are intimately involved with things in the Delta know what's going on. But, you know, from time to time, I just ask people, and last night at the restaurant, I asked our server, do you know anything about the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta? What? You know, and we thought, well, okay, he understands, yeah, there is something there, but really doesn't have any understanding of the size, the issues, the complexity, and so on. So I think, generally speaking, we don't do a very good job of communicating outside our professional silos. And you were talking about a op-ed piece for Delta's place. We should be having op-ed pieces on the Delta all the time. There's so many great stories to tell, and I think newspapers would pick them up. But then, of course, you need people who know how to write that kind of stuff.
Well, there's so much you could write about the science in the Delta that I'm sure you would exceed the infiltration capacity of the major newspapers.
Yeah, but right now the submissions are minuscule.
Well, that's true.
So,
There's a long way to go before we get
you
there.
could
Yeah, that's
triple
right. We could triple or quadruple it easily, I think, especially if they're well written. Additional comments, questions? Is there anything you'd like to hear from us? How are you thinking of finding new editors for the next version of this?
How are you thinking about finding
How is the next?
I guess I had one other comment. I'm not a big believer in living documents. I hear people say the words all the time, but I see it be successful very rarely because most people have better things to do than go back and do incremental updates on stuff they've done. So I you know, it's a nice thought, but I'd rather have sort of systematic revisions and let people get better credit. One of the things I think that made the authors take this much more seriously was the peer review aspects, and I think you got much better attention from the authors and much better products out of it.
No, I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay, I think I would never conceive of the living document as just incremental updates. I think the living document should be a portal you can go to get access to the best current information. It might be SBDS 2016, and there may be from time to time a need to take one of those topics and do it again, or there may be new topics that come up that could be published in SViews or other places. But this living document idea to me is that it's a portal to the science of the Delta that people could turn to get the best up-to-date information.
Good.
Are we about to wrap up?
I think so.
If I
Go ahead.
just, and you sort of said, what would we ask you? And I remember from last time, from 2008, I remember now, we always have these slides that show, you know, ISB, you know, how do you fit into this SBDS process? And we really, you know, that is a question. We're still kind of looking for how the ISP frankly wants to be involved, you know, as kind of the bottom line science
Well, one
we think
one
of ourselves
opportunity
as top line, but
one opportunity is we're going to have a whole bunch of members retiring from this board by the time the next one rolls around. The next volume of this rolls around.
I think so.
So there should be some available talent to help out. I'm hopeful. I'm not volunteering John Weens, by the way. I want the record to reflect that. Dick?
So this session started with Darcy Austin, and I think it should begin. She was our managing editor for 2008. She very gleefully and excitedly accepted the job for 2015, which extended into 2016, which almost spilled over to 2017. And she was in the position that felt most of the heat, most of the frustration, and ours included. And I think she deserves well, along with Maggie Chrisman, who was very much involved in the process as well, a great hand of applause. And
I hate stuff like this, honestly. But thank you very much. And since we're going to be thanking people, I'd like to thank the editorial board for sticking through this, because this one was a tough lift. And to all of our authors, some of whom are on the ISB, and SFUs. And then I mentioned at the council meeting in November that I missed an opportunity to thank USGS for the funding for USGS scientists. So since you guys are here, thank you. So there are so many people to thank, and it's not a one-person kind of thing. It's a big group of people who worked hard to make it happen. So thanks to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we move to our penultimate agenda item. Well, almost penultimate agenda. Preparation for the June teleconference and action items. So for the June teleconference, hopefully we will have a draft memo to review the draft 2017-21 Science Action Agenda. Hopefully we'll have that done. We should, by that time, have some still internal drafts on WaterFix EIR, EIS review. Maybe we'll have some draft or thoughts on op-ed for Delta as an evolving place. An update, and then updates on water quality and monitoring. And it appears we're going to see some CSO, which in my original field of work in civil engineering is combined sewer overflow, but I'm having to get used to a new definition of CSO, of conveyance, storage, and operations, which has some relevance actually to sewerage. And I think we have scheduled, what, a 2-hour teleconference? Everybody's got the time and the place, and, well, right. Action items to be done by then. We should have your comments, improvements on the drafts for the water fix in by end of May. Revisions to the review of the science action agenda by a similar time frame. Is that adequate, Vince?
We're not following on the idea of having a June meeting in person as we discussed it.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
Or do you think we should?
I thought we were going to follow up a little bit to find out what the nature of the timetable is.
Yeah.
And also what specifically the water board folks would be telling us.
Right.
If they met with us. And then we could make that decision.
With the state board.
The state board.
State water, DWR people, excuse me. Got to get if that's right. But we've asked Darcy to arrange a teleconference for 3 of us with Stewardship Council so we can have some advice on the timing of the legalese on all of these things. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, next week, hopefully this coming week, that would be ideal. And that might indicate we want to push this expeditiously. But I think for now, let's assume we don't do that. I think that's all we have for next time. Am I missing anything, Martina? Darcy? All right. Final public comment. None? Mark, thank you. Oh, we're going to hear from Mark. You have to fill out a card. Collect the whole set.
Push the button. Thank you. I just want to bring to your attention that 5 months ago, Congress was signed into law the WIN Act, W-I-N-N. I apologize, I don't have the HR number memorized. But that federal statute contained about 200, I don't have my binder here, I'm sorry, about 250 pages of new statute that dealt with California water. And among other things, directed some of the federal agencies to change the way in which they were doing research and gathering information and data. I realize I'm sitting here, I haven't heard any reference to that act, and I recognize it takes some time for federal law to effects of federal law to, just the reality of federal law to percolate down to its various people that are affected by that. I just want to suggest to you that you're affected by that statute just as I'm personally affected by that statute. Specifically, I think where it impacts you and everything that you do here is with the data collection and the science components in the law. I'd urge you, if you're not aware of that statute and haven't looked at it, to please look at it, because if you proceed without looking at it, you might do so at your own peril, and it's fundamental to what you do. The component I think that's most relevant to you, I believe, is the idea of developing programs of ongoing, living, up-to-date, real-time research and real-time collection of data. Primarily, the focus of that is to inform the decision makers as they go along what's really happening now, not based on what's happened in years past. That, I think, is a good move. But I think your opportunity here is tremendous in your ability to harvest that data along with everybody else. You have to know it's there, who's collecting it, and the purposes for which it's going to be collected. I think that can help you immensely. And again, please take a look at the statute. It's been out there now for 5 months. It's on the web, shall we say, and I'm happy to help you if you're not sure where to find that or where to look and what to see. I can provide you with some technical assistance if that's what you require. That is it.
Thank you, Mark, for bringing that up. There's actually a piece of state legislation that was passed recently on requiring the state agencies to make their data much more available. And the Department of Water Resources and the other agencies are still churning through figuring out how to implement that. That's actually, in my mind, it's probably more likely to have more beneficial impacts to us than this federal legislation. But it's an indication that out in government land, there's a move afoot to try to make more sense of data.
Yes.
And make it more available.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, mostly, yeah. But it's going to be messy. Data are messy.
But it's not fun otherwise.
Well, that's true. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We stand adjourned, unless there are more comments. Okay. Thank you.